Yeah, yun exam. Pero yung Saturday, 9 o'clock down sa yun. Pero pinalala. Yeah, 9. Pumountain bike sa na. Ah, so, yun na mountain bike. That's our favorite.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon. So it's exactly 2 p.m. I don't know if we could already start or we'll wait a few more seconds or we could. Okay, so we could now start. Uh, it is a pleasure to introduce to you a colleague, I think a much younger colleague than I am. And okay, so this is part of the MSI at 50 lecture series. And today we will hear something about the MPA science in the Philippines. And our speaker is Dr. Rene Abesamis. Rene is recently hired by UPMSI. He is an associate professor and a marine biologist, and his research focuses on coral reefs, fish ecology, and marine protected areas. So he was previously based at the Silliman University Angelo King Center for Research and Environmental Management in Dumaguete City, and I would say he was a student here at MSI, no? And we could not afford not to have him here, so he was invited to join us. and he took his PhD at James Cook University in Australia and worked as a postdoctoral researcher at Sukrem and James Cook University, and as adjunct faculty at Silliman University. So in 2013, he was recognized as an outstanding young scientist by the National Academy of Science and Technology. And in 2019, he was awarded with the Australian Alumni Excellence in Innovation Award for his contribution to the Philippines and global marine science. And recently, he was awarded the 2024 Pew Fellowship in Marine Conservation. So a very excellent distinction. One of the only 4 Filipinos awardees in the grant's history. Through the Pew Fellowship, he hopes to further enhance local capacity to identify and protect climate resilient coral reef in the central Philippines, maybe not only the central Philippines, but throughout the Philippines. So without much ado, let me have Rene, as I fondly call him, for Abesamis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this talk. It's a pleasure to be here. And this is actually my second time to give a talk like this. I was invited to give a talk during the 40th anniversary of MSI. So I hope I don't get invited for the 60th. Okay. So um, so today I thought about this a lot. And I said, maybe it's good to distill some of the things that I've learned over the past close to quarter of a century about MPAs in our country. And so maybe the topic is fitting to the occasion of the anniversary of this institute, 50 years. Okay. But I'll explain as we go along why I chose this topic. But before we go any further, siguro we have to be on the same page. Okay, not all of us work on MPAs. Okay. When we talk about MPAs, most likely you'll be thinking of something like that. Which is an area of the sea, including its species and habitats, fully or partially protected from all forms of human activities that has something to do with extraction. You might get confused, when you hear MPAs and marine reserves and marine sanctuaries, core zone fish sanctuaries. It can be quite confusing for sure. But think of fully or partially protected. But the fully protected ones are the ones that really will have a strong effect, because they will allow species and habitats to recover more quickly. So in this talk, I might switch around between MPAs and sanctuaries and reserves depending on what name was used to call a certain place, but think of them generally as MPAs, and then if I say fully no-take, that means it's fully protected. Okay. So because of that, they are, good. They're thought to be good biodiversity conservation and fisheries management tools, and they're so widely used all over the world. You might have heard of the term MPA networks. Okay. So MPA networks, the definition that I like to use is this: systems of MPAs protecting a sufficient proportion of the populations of the species that we care about, using habitats usually as a proxy. 15 to 40% is what is usually identified as the sufficient proportion based on theoretical studies. It's no coincidence, for example, that the 30 by 30 target of the current global biodiversity framework is 30%. Okay. This also means that you're trying to protect the species that you care about throughout its entire life cycle. And because species move around, including the living habitats, like corals, for example, or even seagrass beds, seagrass, and mangrove, they have a dispersive stage in their life cycles. That's why it's important, or maybe you have come across many times the concept of connectivity when MPA networks are described. Okay, and maybe we should also define that connectivity, which is basically the linking of local populations through a certain dispersive phase. Usually it's the small ones, the babies, but adults can also move around. So in the broader definition of connectivity, adult movement is part of that, for fish, for example. Okay. Where are we now with the MPAs in the Philippines? I checked with Dr. Hazel Arceo the other day, and she said that the MPA database, the MSN database, actually lists about 1,900 MPAs in the Philippines right now. And um, if you're not aware, there's 115 million or more than 150 million Filipinos today. So just think about that. We're using these as tools for biodiversity conservation and fisheries management, and there's a lot of us, who might be dependent on the marine environment. The picture on the right shows you how, it shows in one graph the history of MPA establishment in the Philippines. And two things happened in the early history of this. The local government code, which enabled a lot of the local management to happen, and also NIPAS Act, which allowed these nationally legislated MPAs to be established. Okay, but for sure, most of the MPAs that we have in the 1,900 are small. They're locally managed. 70% of LGUs today, local government units today, have at least one MPA. Okay, it's maybe the two of the most famous small ones would be these two: Sumilon Island and Marine Reserve, and Apo Island Marine Sanctuary. You might have heard of them. I'm going to talk about them later. We should do a reef of Beta Reef for sure. And it's an example of a large, fully no-take MPA. Okay, so these are just examples of MPAs in our country. Okay. So the objective of my talk today is to highlight 10 things to get right. It took me a while to get to 10. In the original description of the title, it's just things to get right. So I'm sure it's not just 10, but I try to distill it to just 10. So you can keep it in your head. And these 10 things have something to do with the use of and science behind MPAs and MPA networks in our context, here in the Philippines. And why am I doing this? I thought that it's important to raise awareness about these 10 things. There's probably some misconception about some of them, so it's probably important to talk about them. And because we're at the Marine Science Institute, you're all scientists. I would like to. I hope that this can inspire more study. And for all those who are listening, of course, because this is applied science, this can be food for thought for managers in many levels, and perhaps for some of you, especially if you have a thesis in mind, or or a project, this could provide some research directions. Okay, so why this talk, right? Why this kind of talk for the 50th anniversary of this institute, and why me? Okay, it might be good to show this timeline, 1974 to 2024. We all know that, the institute started under the efforts of Dr. Gomez. Back in the day, it was at the NSRI. That's actually a picture of the NSRI, and it wasn't called the Marine Science Institute. It was called the Marine Sciences Center. Fast forward 50 years later, right? And just a few weeks ago, we renamed this very building to honor him. Okay, so that in a nutshell is the 50-year span of this institute. Okay. But other things, critical things happened in 1974. Okay. The first one is Angel Alcala, the other national scientist, established the Silliman University Marine Laboratory in Dumaguete. Okay, that's critical to the story today because he did that. He was such a busy man. That wasn't enough to start a marine lab. He also was busy trying to establish a small marine reserve in Sumilon, and in 1974, it was formally established. And the idea really was, for him as a scientist, was what will happen if you close off about 25% of the coral reef in Sumilon? What will that do to fish catch? That's what he had in mind. So in essence, this was the very first MPA that tested a scientific question about MPAs in the Philippines. Okay. Other things happened after that in the Dumaguete area, 40 to 50 years ago. One of them is this. Oops. Too much. Okay. One of them is this. 1982, Apo Island Marine Sanctuary was established. That's not too far from Dumaguete. Sinilang is actually in Cebu, no? Just in front of the city, but you can actually see the southern tip of Cebu from Dumaguete. But south of Dumaguete, you have the Apo Island Marine Sanctuary. In 1982, another thing happened, no? Which was a young postdoc by the name of Gary Ross, who heard about Alcala's work in 1981 about Sumilon, went to Alcala and said, "You're the only one in the world who's studying this, apparently. Can I come and visit you to work with you?" So Gary Ross is an Australian. He was working at the Australian Institute of Marine Science. He read Alcala's paper in 1981 and wrote to him, snail mail. Okay, and then the rest is history. Those two collaborated over that long a period that up to this day, the effects of Sumilon and Apo, or the ecological effects, are measured annually. And that has produced so many papers, lots of famous papers. But the other thing that happened was Sumilon and Apo became the blueprints for MPA expansion in the Philippines. Okay, so that was a story over over that lifespan of MSI. That's what happened with regards to MPAs. The other things that happened were Ross eventually became faculty at James Cook University, and Alcala started SUACREM, Silliman University Angelo King Center. So that's where I was employed for a while. And because their work was so famous, and so influential, they also received the 1999 Pew Fellowship. It was one of those few joint awards, to anyone. Okay. So what does that have to do with me? So my first claim to fame was I lived through most of it. Okay. So 48 years at least. Okay. Unfortunately, it was only in 1989 that I learned how to use a snorkel and mask. And very fortunately, in 1996, this paper was published. It was actually taken up in my ecology class in Upit Diliman. Okay, and I remember it quite well because my ecology professor was very, enthusiastic about it. So I came across one of their famous papers, Alcala and Ross. In 1998 and 2002, I got employed. I was employed here in the laboratory of Tony Alinio. Okay, so that was my very first entry into the world of marine science. And I was an assistant for about 4 years, also a student. Okay, and then I left to pursue graduate studies overseas. Came back for a bit, worked for Dr. Gomez for about a year to help him with a project, and then left again for a long time until last year I was hired. So that's my history of with MSI. Okay, in between 1998 and 2023, I was actually working with Alcala and Russ. Okay, um, sorry, 2003 to 2023, I was working with Alcala and Russ. I like this photo because this is actually Alcala and Russ working in the field. This is in Antigua Island. They're probably talking about fish. Okay. Alcala, really, because I was here, I took the photo. Alcala was talking about fish catch monitoring in Mantigue, and Gary Russ and I just came from a dive counting fish in the marine reserve or the marine protected area of Mantigue in Camiguin. Okay. But to properly tell the story, to gain some credibility of, okay, that's a long time, but what's your contribution really to all this? Might be good to illustrate it a little bit more. So these are timelines of those two places. Sumilan, established in 1974, Apo in 1982. This is the MPA. That's outside of the MPA within the same island. Same with Apo Island. Okay. That's me. Okay. That's when I became, more involved or really involved in marine science. It's important to keep in mind that as early as the late 70s, Dr. Alcala was already at it. He was already measuring fish yields from Sumilan and then up, and all the way up to the early 2000s, he still had some projects trying to understand fish yields together with Hilconida Columpong and Aileen Maipa, okay, at Silliman University. Gary Wells, in the meantime, after meeting Alcala in 82, started these long-term surveys, which became long-term surveys of those two places. So that's 1982, sorry, 1983, okay? So what happens there is Gary measured benthic habitat condition as well as the fish assemblage. In methods that we routinely use today, fish visual sensors on scuba, but back in the day, they were still being developed. Okay. So it's almost like a natural experiment, right? There are two places, two islands with treatments, reserve treatment, and then outside there are the controls. Okay, and you get to watch it. What's the effect on the fish assemblage? What's the effect on the habitat? What's the effect on fish yields? But the story was a lot more complicated than that. Sumilan, for example, had a very colorful history of on-off protection, okay, which was really instructive. What will happen if protection suddenly ceased and it was open to fishing again, or with the entire island, or destructive fishing. So it was very, very instructive. In contrast to Apo Island, which by 1983, protection was pretty much in place. Okay. But because this is a natural experiment, other things happened along the way. You have coral bleaching in 1998. Now we're in the fourth global bleaching event, right there. That's why in 2 weeks from now, we want to be out in the water, okay, to see what's going on. And in November, we'll watch these two islands. But other than that, there are other things like typhoons, okay, which really impacted these two places. Okay, so my part of the story has something to do more with that period. And when I was in Dumaguete for a good part of 2 decades, I helped continue these surveys, and in fact, I still the point is to continue it until 50 years, hopefully. And I did my master's. The topic for my master's and my PhD were all about this. As a postdoc, I also got to ask other questions, worked with many people, including research assistants from both Silliman and James Cook University, and also co-advise and advise some students. Okay, so there's a lot of the work was continued by me, for that period, and yeah, that was a very fulfilling experience. Okay, so so that's some credibility, I guess, for this talk. Okay, there's some evidence of the long-term surveys. Okay, so we take a photo. We try to take photo after every milestone. This photo was taken in the 30-year anniversary of the surveys. If you read closely, the cake says 30 years, 1983, 2013. Okay, but yeah, you can see it. Year 35, we were running out of fingers, so Gaiwas had to put up his foot. Year 40, 2 feet. Okay, so we did these surveys last year. That's the 40th year. So these are pretty long-term, really good surveys. Okay, that's Tata. That's the dive body of Gary for the past 30 years. Okay, right. So now back to the topic. Okay, so really simple talk outline. Okay, so I want to walk you through some theory first. How are MPAs and MPA networks supposed to work? Okay. Second, we go to the 10 things. Okay, and in the 10 things, I show some of the what I think are some of the best evidence to support what I'm trying to say. And also, these are based on my own personal experience. Okay, not only in the science, but also in applying the science. And some concluding remarks. Okay, so that's what we're going to go through in the next 30 minutes. Okay. Okay, how do MPAs and MPA networks work? Okay, I'd like to think about this as two kinds of effect: an additive effect and a synergistic effect. It's all about additive effects. If you put up a lot of MPAs like this, right, that means that there are more species that are protected, more species that are recovering. These species are becoming more abundant and increasing in biomass, diversity as well, of course, and reproductive output. Okay, because they're for example, if you talk about fish, as they grow older, they produce more eggs. Okay, the female fish at least. Then one big expectation is if there's a lot of buildup here, for example, of abundance or biomass, some of that will spill over. Okay, that's a classic expectation. It's called adult spillover. Okay, and if you talk about coral reef fishes, the expectation is that this effect is probably going to be spatially limited because coral reef fishes are quite site attached. Most of them. The other effect is a synergistic effect. And here, we're talking about a different kind of connectivity, which is through larval dispersal. And if that happens, for example, this one, you're hoping that the recovery of these individual MPAs will be faster. It's a synergistic effect. And it becomes more important, especially if there's not much outside, meaning the populations are so heavily fished that the areas that are protected are the ones that have a lot of the biomass. Okay, we're hoping that isn't that local, meaning they don't only serve seed or impact, the MPAs nearby. What we're hoping for is this: a fisheries enhancement effect. So these areas that are open to fisheries hopefully are receiving a lot of recruits through larval dispersal. Okay, so that's basically it. That's those two ideas are what you would expect from MPAs and MPA networks, and how they can be good tools for biodiversity conservation and fisheries management. Larval subsidies, as a last point, is expected to be far ranging. Okay. Okay. Let's now go through the 10 things. Okay, 10 things. So what I did was to break them into 6 so that we won't take long. The first 2 are: one, employees need strict permanent protection, okay, from fishing for benefits to build up. Okay, that's easy to understand. But you have to remember also that habitat quality is also a very big driver of this. Okay. Second, adult spillover is likely to be quite limited. So in my life as a scientist, talking about this, I feel that there is some misconception here. Okay. 4, 5, 6, and 7 say that we need more of them. We need more that are larger. They need to protect more than the shallow coral reefs. Okay. And employees are likely to be connected within what's emerging as the feasible spatial scales for MPA networks. Let's say 100 kilometers. Okay. Number 8, larval subsidies are likely to be more important than adult spillover, but this is difficult to quantify. It's hard to feel. Okay. Number 9, the very large and isolated MPAs are going to be very important. So think about that. Tubataha, for example. And lastly, we really need to better understand how MPAs can help in productivity in a changing climate. Okay. So those are the 10 things to get right, and that's the end of my talk. No kidding. So those are the 10 things to get right. So we go through them one by one, okay? Okay. So first 2, they need strict permanent protection from fishing, and habitat is a big driver. Okay, let's illustrate that. With Sumilon, the very first MPA. So it was established in 1974, protected for almost 10 years. Problem was, because of politics, protection failed in 1983-84. You probably know the story. Okay? And when it broke down, when productive management broke down, it was intensively fished. Okay? Read papers. Okay? It's an interesting story. And as you would expect, 10 years of protection in just 18 months, this was what happened. In some groups, up to 94% of abundance was removed. Okay, especially the most sensitive ones, let's say groupers, for example, or snappers. Okay, there was a clear decline in species richness. So all of that biodiversity was eroded. There's a shift in community structure because of that. Okay, there's a 50% decrease in catch per unit effort because Alcala was measuring it. And he also estimated that there was a 54% decrease in total fish yield. So 2 different things, catch per unit effort and total fish yield. So that's what happened. 10 years of that, of protection, very first MPA, and it collapsed. His conclusion was actually, oh, maybe spillover was helping to provide fish to fishers. And that's why after it collapsed, catch rates were down. Okay, very famous paper in 1990. Okay, so that's the first point. Okay, from Sumilon, the very first MPA that tested this in the Philippines. Let's look at that's a negative side of things. Let's look at the positive side of things. In Apo, it's a different story. Okay, so solid protection. Here, I'm showing you 26 years of full protection, and it clearly showed, positive buildup or positive effects buildup. 40% higher total fish biomass after 26 years. If you just look at the large carnivorous fish, the most sensitive to fishing, 27% higher biomass and 11 times more species. Okay, so no doubt that can happen. Okay, no doubt. But the second point was something to do with habitat, remember? Okay, so unfortunately, in 2010 and 2011, Apo was badly hit by two typhoons. Sorry, 2011 and 2012, back to back, Sendong and Pablo. Remember the natural experiment, the reserve and the MPA and the fish site? The MPA is here, the fish site is there. In short, because typhoons propagate from east to west, that the MPA, the marine sanctuary was badly hit, but the control site was not. So it remained intact. And just to further illustrate this, this is Apo Sanctuary before Sendong and Pablo. And at that time, coral cover was 60 to 70%. The hard coral cover was 60 to 70% at 8 to 20 meters. Okay. This is a few days after Pablo. Okay. In 2012, it was totally obliterated. Okay. Less than 3%. Okay. Actually, this was Pablo in 2012. I don't have photos of Sendong. In Sendong, it looked like a little bit better than that. In Sendong, it's as if some divers went down and then smashed the remaining coils. So it was total obliteration. Okay. So if that's not graphic enough, here's a graph. So what happened was this is the reserve. Here's the MPA. 60-70%. There's coral bleaching a little bit in 2010. Sandro and Pablo came in, reduced it to about less than 3%. But there's a plus side to the story, which is 10 years of, it was given 10 years to recover, and it seems to be going up. Okay? There's some shift, these are soft corals in the reserve, decided to go in first, and now they're down, with the hard corals taking over. Okay? On the other side, the blue one, was fine, but in 2021, Habagat waves from a strong typhoon out there reduced the western side, the coral cover on the western side a little bit. So meaning it's not entirely immune from typhoons. Okay, so that's what happened. By 2021 and 22, it looks like that already. Okay, so coral cover was a little bit better, 25 to 36%, but still far from the 60 to 70% that it was before the typhoons. Okay, so habitat changed quite a bit within that span. That's only the last 20 years. Okay, and that's going to drive a lot of the fish life as well, as you can imagine. Okay, so this is what I call the losers and the winners. Okay, a loser would be something like this: a snapper used to live in the reserve, quite high its density, and then because of habitat loss inside the sanctuary, it went down. It hasn't recovered. What we think happened was some of them transferred to the other side. Okay, that's why there's a bump in the abundance of snappers, and then that's eroding due to fishing. Okay, and these examples of dinner, scarabs or parrotfishes, they like dead coral and sand bacteria that live there. So they were winners. So the abundance increased, they took advantage, and as coral cover recovered, they were moving out of that place. Okay, so that's what happened with the scarabs. So they were winners for a while. And then there's what I call the comeback kids. So Mucus, for example, declined after the typhoons, but has recovered. We think they've recovered because the numbers are about the same as before. But these groupers are the ones that hide in overhangs, so they're not that affected. Butterfly fishes, because of the increase in hard coral cover inside the sanctuary, they're slowly increasing. So they're making a comeback. So the case in Apo really illustrates the importance of habitat. That's unpublished stuff, by the way. There's a paper, 2020 paper that we brought out that also establishes that over a longer time scale. So those are first 2 points again: protection from fishing and habitat. Okay. Now let's move on to point number 3. Okay, adult spillover is likely to be quite limited. So maybe it's just me, but I feel that adult spillover, a lot of people are thinking about it as a major effect. Okay, and again, the best example is Apo Island, and this was part of my master's degree. And I published this in a paper in 2006. And I feel that there are only a few examples of out there that really try to quantify the effect of MPAs on fisheries in the Philippines. And what it took was for me and an assistant to actually measure the fisheries yield in that small island. So we looked for a way to monitor the daily catch of about 100 fishers for 8 months in 2003 and 2004. And thanks to the local knowledge on the island and the local system of getting fish and selling fish, we were able to record catch composition at the family level, the weight, fishing gear, fishing effort, also the fishing grounds, because the fishing grounds in Apo have names. Okay, and we also were able to record distance from the MPA, because in theory, adult spillover will happen close to the MPA boundaries. Okay, so that's the MPA. So the buoys, color-coded buoys that we installed here, and we use that to get a fix on where fishers were fishing. Okay. What's the data like? This is catch per unit effort, and MR is near reserve, W is Western Apo, M is Northern Apo. As you can see, the highest catch per unit effort, is usually close to the reserve, whether it's hook and line, gill net, or spear gun, and that translates to higher income per unit effort. So that's an indication of, hey, spillover is probably happening. Okay. But if you look at the overall fishery, and sorry to show you a table like this, but the message is, if you look at the different parts of the island, northern, western, and near the reserve, most of the fishing actually happens in the northern part of the island. Okay, that's where all the hook and line happens, and that's well known in Apo. And then about 7.6% of the effort is spent near the reserve. In terms of yield, that's about 10% for near the reserve. And in terms of income, about 8.7%. Not surprising if that's the way they fish on the island. Okay. But what is more important to recognize is that that shouldn't be unexpected, because Apo Island, the reserve in Apo Island occupies about 10% of the coral reef. So it's probably going to give less than 10%, right, to the entire place. And we estimated that year, the amount of fish taken out of the reef amounts to about 10 tons per square kilometer of reef. And if it's 10%, it's going to be 1%. 1 ton. And it should be much less than that. So spillover is probably giving less than 1 ton per square kilometer of reef per year. Okay. So if you look at that, that's a paper. That's one of the few measurements out there. Okay, because it's partially because it's not easy to do, because fish is landed all over the place. You can imagine. Okay. 4, 5, 6, and 7. We'll pick them all up together. Okay. We need more of them. We need more that are larger. Like more than shallow coral reefs. Okay. Let's take 4, 5, 6 first. Okay. This has something to do with designing MPA networks. Okay. Why do we need more and larger MPAs? Okay. Consider these 2 points first. So we know that most of the MPAs that we have now, the 1,900 of them, are small because they're usually locally based. When I mean small, they're usually about less than 1 square kilometer, or anywhere from 10 to 50 hectares. There are exceptions, of course, even for locally managed MPAs. Overall, one estimate says that there's if you look at municipal waters, because for example in RA 8550, that's one basis, it's only 0.5% of municipal waters are protected by these MPAs. Okay, the law itself even says that we need to be gunning for 15%. Okay, per municipality for LGUs. Science says it's probably 15 to 40%, and maybe closer to 40% if there's heavy fishing outside of the MPAs. Okay. Let's talk about size for a moment. There's some work that I had with Alison Green and others. The home range information available in 2014, and we developed this graph, and you can see that, okay, these are different species with different home ranges measured in terms of linear distance. And you can see that there are more of the species here, less of those. So there is potential for movement essentially for fish. Let's just compare what we have. So less than 1 square kilometer would be something like that. Okay, the usual maximum length of your MPAs will be within that scale. So if you want them to be larger than that, you have to look at this scale maybe, which is probably feasible in some situations, not all situations. And if you do that, you know, you protect more of those species if you wanted to provide more protection. In very, very special situations, this length scale might be relevant. For example, if you talk about Upper Reef to Bataha, or Silio, you know, that might be relevant. Okay. And of course, beyond that, you know, I don't think MPAs would be your weapon of choice. So, this work gives you some idea of what would be the benefits of bigger MPAs. Okay. Let's consider two more points. There's some indication that the rate of establishment is going down. We don't know if it's a database, you know, it's a data collection issue or reporting issue, but it's there. But you know, somebody needs to check. Alcala reviewed the status of employees in the Visayas in 2008, and what's worrisome is his conclusion was only 3 out of 10 were actually functional. The rest are probably paper parks, you know. So that means that that is probably functionally that would be smaller. Okay. Okay, and most of these are coral reef MPAs. Well, because there seems to be this misconception out there saying that MPAs are for coral reefs, nothing else. Okay, which should be corrected, I think. But even if you just consider coral reefs, one study says that less than 4% of our coral reefs are actually protected by MPAs. Okay. There are really good reasons to protect other than coral reefs. You have seagrass beds, mangroves, you know, and they harbor diversity, and apart from overlaps with coral reefs. And there is that idea that some of them might be serving as important nursery grounds, especially for species that we care about because they're fishery species. But apart from that, there's also those deeper reefs, and the non-reefs, including soft sediment habitats that harbor a lot of this biodiversity as well. Not as much as coral reefs, but they're also important, also in a fishery sense. Okay, so and there's an illustration of MPA or MPAs in South Negros, and they're limited to coral reefs, and this is what can be found beyond coral reefs. Okay, I point that out. You should do this. You should do that. But actually, we have some experience trying to nudge real-world MPA networks towards that direction. And there's an illustration of some work that we've done through the USAID Fish Program in the Calamianes, where we helped an MPA network of 4 LGUs to move from 19 existing MPAs to, at least in from a design phase, 7 to 8 MPAs that can protect closer to 30%. Okay? So, and we wrote a manual about it and try, so that how to go about this in the context of the Philippines. Okay, so Let's now go to point 7. Okay, they're likely to be highly connected within the feasible scales of MPA networks. Okay, I raise this because in the work that I just described, which is in the Colombianes, I find myself not actually emphasizing connectivity. When we talk about MPA networks. Why is that? Because the empirical evidence says, and this evidence from South Negros that we did using parentage analysis, it says that within that scale, let's say this is, 60 kilometers, okay? Connections would be highly likely, okay? And this work using parentage analysis, this is real data, not models, and supported by oceanographic work together with the case lab. Okay, so I wasn't too worried about connectivity within that spatial scale, and usually that's a spatial scale at which MPA networks in the Philippines could operate. Let's illustrate that what the data from that work suggests. That within, let's say, a spatial scale of 50 kilometers, you can expect a lot of babies to be dispersing within that range. Other works out there say similar things, but at different scales. So this is for anemone fish, that's for grouper, and that's for corals. So this is where we are at in the Philippines, and we're well within, those dispersal envelopes. Okay, so connectivity shouldn't be that much of a worry. Okay. Number 8, larval subsidies are likely to be more important than adult spillover, but this is very difficult to quantify. How do you actually do this? Well, we have to use models. And we played around with models about 10 years ago to explore this with the case group. And so we played around with those models in this part of the world where upper and Sunilan are found. And we created biophysical larval dispersal models with huge assumptions about how snappers, for example, produce their babies, with duration of protection, and assumptions based on many studies and some data on how the larvae of that fish behaves. Okay, so you can explore this with models, and it's quite tricky to set up. I know maybe things have improved by now, but it's probably very, very technically demanding. But what it's saying, what this work said was, yes, if you look at the green ones, those are babies that came from MPAs, and the blue ones came from fished areas. Keep in mind that the MPAs 6% of the coral reefs in that area, meaning they can actually punch above their weight because most of the babies are found in the MPAs rather than in the fished areas. Even if 94% are open to fishing, there's actually very little in terms of populations outside of the MPAs. And if coverage increases to 15%, you should expect greater benefits. That's not so surprising because most of the babies are produced by the MPA. But what is important to point out are the error bars. The error bars are telling you that, okay, consistent with the viability of, of the pelagic larval stage, anything that has to do with that, it will be hard to detect this in the real world. Okay, and it's going to be hard to feel this if you're a fisher. Okay, it doesn't mean that it's not happening, but it's hard to detect. Okay. In terms of improving this science, one of the things that we pointed out was we also actually need better data on how fish produce their babies. Okay, and this is work with one of my students, Adnan Bukhol, where we actually went to the fish, sample the fish, look at the fecundity, and then look at the age, how long does it take for them to actually mature and how much do they produce? So, some basic science. Surprisingly, even that sort of information is lacking. Yeah, and these are for two sex-changing species. The snappers are gonochoristic; they're not sex-changing. Okay. Okay, number 9, the very large and isolated ones are going to be very important. And we're going to talk about Tubataha here, And Tubataha is one of those few what we call newly MPAs, the Nordic and Force older large isolated MPAs. Okay. And according to the literature, these new MPAs are going to be more important. Okay. Um, and in this work, we compared it with Cagayancillo, an adjacent large MPA, but it's not Neoli. It's new. Okay. And it's not fully no-take, but it's also large and isolated. Okay. And these new MPAs are probably going to be very, very important for the large predators. Okay. The ones that tend to have a larger home range and they have a sensitive life history. Okay. They're slower to recover as well. That's what the information in Apple also suggests. It probably takes 40 years for these things to fully recover in a small place. And we collaborated with some friends in Lamago and we looked at their Bev data because they were just looking at the sharks. And so I said, why don't we look at the bony fishes? And what it's saying is, we know that Tubatana is you've been protected for 25 years, and it's no doubt that it's like so. The things there have recovered so well. Kent and I have a paper talking about behavior of snappers and sorry, it's not snappers, emperors together with Caelinus undulatus. They're following each other around. You only see those in very wild places. And if you look at Cagayancillo, it's not so different to Tubataha when it comes to species richness and abundance of these large predatory fish. Meaning there's an opportunity to actually do the right thing also in Cagayancillo. And imagine if you have 2 of these large, well-managed MPAs in the Sulu Sea, that could be a powerhouse for a lot of things. Okay? So that's number 9. Okay, number 10. Okay, last point. You need to better understand how they can help maintain productivity in the face of a changing climate. And we know that MPAs, can help in climate change mitigation and adaptation. You can look at this paper, Roberts, to see what it's all about. Some of these things I didn't even think of, to be honest. But what really caught my attention was this, okay, which is they can help prevent biodiversity loss and then help maintain livelihoods and ecosystem services. And that's what I'm really interested in the next in the next few years, because the Pew project that I proposed has something to do with this, which is trying to understand the idea of climate resilient coral reefs and protect them. Okay, can we actually do that with MPAs? And in this work, collaborating with Emily, Al, and Eileen, and to try to to see how far we can go in 3 years to understand this. The idea is to look at 2 MPA networks, one facing the Bohol Sea, the other one facing the Sulu Sea in southern Negros. And there's a good reason to compare those 2 because Bohol Sea is hypothesized to be a climate refugium for coral reefs, because the prediction is the heating rates in the Bohol Sea would be slower than on the other side. Okay. And we can see that now, and this is the Coral Bleaching Watch alert 2 days ago, saying that it's alert level 1 in the Sulu Sea, and there are reports of bleaching in Tubataha. Yet in the Bohol Sea, it's still in yellow. And that's because of the Pacific influence. Okay. So, in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll try to do this. Engage local communities of not only the stakeholders, but also the local scientists, okay, to hopefully share data, okay, to identify data gaps and data strengths. And then for those who need training, especially in citizen science methods, we're offering these, these are 2 homegrown methods, so that more people can actually be in the water collecting data. And then for scientists, hopefully people are open to showing data in a platform called Mermaid. Okay. Um, those activities should help us understand using a resilience framework where are the possible climate resilient risks, based on whatever data you can get and information. Over the next 3 years, we're also hoping to collect data with those who want to participate in this in that region, and sustain a lot of the training activities. And this is where all the science is also generated, think tanks, workshops with the community, like really understand where this is heading. Finally, we want to elevate the local experiences to the national consciousness. It's timely because right now there's a lot of talk about the National Coral Reef Program, and of course the 30 by 30 target. Okay, and whatever is learned in the local, we want to elevate it in the national. That's the idea. So those are the 10 things. So I'm sure showing them to you again because it's been almost an hour, and they're a lot, but hopefully they're easy to remember, and they're not mutually exclusive. The ideas. But let me just say a few words, say a few more words. One, it's clear that we need to get these right. Okay, some more than the others for sure. Okay, especially those that have to do with MPA network design and facing climate change. Okay. Second, please keep in mind that MPAs are not a cure-all. I mean, it's just one of many tools that you can use. So we can't put all of our eggs in that basket. There are so many other things to do to try to mitigate the bad situation. Okay. Number three, there's still plenty of room for scientific research with regards to MPAs in the Philippines. And maybe I hope that, in this audience, you could pick up some of those things listening to the 10 things. Okay. And yeah, I'm happy to have a discussion, have a chat if you were interested. Okay. And finally, I think it's important to thank a few people. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Ed Gomez, for establishing this institute where I'm employed in right now. But not only that, but but he was also quite an influential mentor. Perry Alua for sure. I'm showing finally the whole photo here. So that's Perry, Mugs, and Hazel. Hazel I just called the other day. So Perry, we will do the MPAs in the Philippines for sure. So very, very influential. Okay. I have Alcala. Oops, sorry. Hey, Alcala. No, how do you even start? So he was at it 2 days, 2 years before even I was born, or maybe longer, diba? And he was really, really influential. What I like to back then most about these two is that idea of collaboration. And we talked about it a lot, when I was hanging out with them, saying that, it's really more important to collaborate than to compete. And that's the epitome of those words, those two. I think Gary was, without him, I mean, I learned a lot from him. And especially that collaboration between him and Dr. Alcala, that was really, really influential to me as well. And that's probably, the 10 things that we heard today were probably also inspired by a lot of conversations that I've had with those two. Okay. And Perry, of course. And lots of people, I tried to put in a lot of, I didn't have time really, but there's probably 2 or 3 times more, other mentors, colleagues, former and current students, supporters from local communities, the government, non-government, friends, who are also colleagues, funders, and of course family. So yeah. So I hope that was. I hope you learned something today, and thank you very much for listening.
Hello. Thank you, Rene, for that very interesting talk. So maybe if you have some questions, burning questions, I couldn't see the people online, so who are in charge of the online participants. And if there are some questions, who will read the questions, I hope somebody could take charge of that. Okay, so I will take charge of the question from online. So from inside the seminar room, any question? Who wants to start the ball rolling? Ano?
Thank you, Rene, for the overview and the insights into what needs to be done more. So I'll go with the last part, maybe, of your important things to do. So yung design, though, you did say that you don't only have to look at coral reefs. So dun sa bagong sites ba na yun that you're looking at, will there be, smart MPAs that straddle? I'm not familiar kasi with that island, no? So many islands usually hindi naman extensive ang reef flat with the seagrass and all of that. So I was just wondering, is that just one? Would it be helpful at some point? Maybe to come up with a typology? Kasi ang dami nating isla Rene. No? A typology of where the strategic island types, considering habitats, will be important. Kasi, if we're talking about scaling, napaka-diverse kasi ng, and I'm talking to the, here, we know enough how diverse, how heterogeneous the habitats are. So, and the other thing I'm going to say is, kasali ba ang iba bukod sa isda? Like, of course, other important invertebrates that are ecologically important in all of those areas, no? So siguro that's the other thing. I mean, we have a lot to build on the corals and the fish, but if you want to look at it, meron bang, what is really the way? I mean, aside from your view, so inisip ko lang, okay, yeah, resilience, pero are you going to incorporate some of the must do in your new venture?
Parang dalawa o tatlong tanong yata yun right? The last part is, if there were like 4 or 5 of me with like 10 times the funding of Pew, we'll probably do it, no? Yeah, but to answer the other two, unahin ko yung other organisms that I didn't highlight in the talk, like invertebrates. That's an area open for investigation. Much of the information that, all of that talked about fish recovering, ganyan, pero we hardly see any demonstration, at least here in this context. And correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I'm not reading literature, di ba? What's happening with the invertebrates, right? Even in the greening areas. Well, that's an opportunity, I think. Okay. But typology is the other one, because I also talk about this quite a lot. Of course, with coral reefs in mind, but it has something to do with the geological history, complicated geological history of this country. Here in the Marine Science Institute, there are geologists here. So we should be having a conversation with them, talking about, bakit ba nagkaroon ng seagrass dyan? Bakit ba nagkaroon ng ganitong klaseng reef dyan? Okay? Because I think that's key to understanding a lot of these things as well. I don't think na a coral reef with a, what it would be 3-in-1, 3-in-1 habitats in the back reef would maybe would have I don't know kung slightly or what, but it would be different siguro yung responses nun versus something that's not like that. For example, patchier reefs or something that, or even patchier reefs and patchier seagrass and everything. So even that in itself, the typology gives you an idea of where you could probably start investigating if you only had limited resources. And that can be done, I think, in my mind, using remote sensing, for example, and verifying it using field surveys. Sorry to point it out, but I think 2 of my students have been trying to encourage them to think that way in terms of the different types of reef, for example, even on a
Maybe to make your life more complicated, since Annette started talking about invertebrates, I might as well ask something about seaweed, seagrasses, and mangroves. Annette mentioned a little about this, and it was also part of your talk. And I think with regard to connectivity, and we were talking about babies, and you know that some of the looking at the life history of some fishes, part of their life history is spent in the seagrass bed or part in the estuarine area. So I don't know if it is something that you could look into an MPA with this integral component from coral reef to seagrass bed, seaweed bed, and to the estuarine mangrove area. Because part of the data that you presented correlating fish biomass with habitat integrity, it's more on the hard coral substrate.
Yes. Yeah, that's part of the general interest, no, of what I plan to do in MSI, not necessarily the Pew. No. For example, I have two students who are looking at non-reef habitats, okay, for at least fish again, sorry. But yeah. Yeah, as I said, diba? Times 5, times 10, whatever. So, but yeah, I fully agree. Okay. And one thing that I want to point out there is um, the idea of macroalgal beds, for example, harboring much more, serving as a probably a more influential habitat for fish, baby fish, than seagrass. Sorry, but it seems to me that that's a situation if you take a look at it. But of course, that's a hypothesis, and you can check it out. We wrote a couple of reviews about it not so long ago. So macroalgal beds would be important. Yeah, kind of a general thrust to investigate. The other thing that I want to add is actually in the literature there are people investigating that. What's the effect of including these types of habitats in the design of your network? Okay, and they're not just theoretical explorations; they actually look at empirical effects.
Okay. And then just question online. Okay, if somebody could read that. Maybe you could read the two most interesting questions. Thank you.
So the first question is from an anonymous attendee. I noticed that the MPAs you presented are up to only 20 meters deep. But with the increasing interest in MCE studies, when designing and conceptualizing a marine protected area network, is depth considered as part of the criteria? And are deeper areas included in the planning and design of MPAs?
That's part of the idea. You encompass broader types of habitats, including what are referred to now as mesophotocoral ecosystems. No? So the idea is to move beyond coral reefs, diba? To not leave coral reefs behind, but to include so many other types of habitats. So the answer is yes, in principle, but the general situation at the moment is we also have only started to look at mesophotic coral ecosystems, in general in science. So first we have to understand. I mean, there's probably no harm including them for sure. Okay, and in fact, in the 2024 paper on Taha and Cagayan de Silo, that's the whole point. To understand what's down there. So yes, the answer is yes. We should be encouraging that. How? There are practical considerations as well. For example, in many of the MPAs that are existing, if you look at the boundaries in the maps, technically they do include those deeper areas. Okay, if you look at the boundaries, the practical problem is how will they put a buoy, at 200 meters? So what happens is the buoys are shallower. Now, this is a practical problem. And then the LiDAR is marking that enclosed area is now smaller. But the LiDAR buoys is now smaller. So there's a practical problem there that needs to be solved. I don't know how. Could be in some places kasi when they say that's the MPA, regardless of whether there's a buoy or not, you're not gonna go there. But in our country, there has to be a buoy. So there's a practical problem there.
There's a set of questions that talk about other stakeholders. So, like the general question is, how can we engage communities such as fisher folks, coastal communities in MPA management? I'll read the rest that are in that line. In your 30 plus years of experience, how have science and local knowledge been mobilized to ensure that conservation actors, including local communities, remain interested and supportive of long-term protection and expansion efforts? And what could be the role of non-scientists support improvement of MPA management and MPA networks?
So the first one is, in my experience,
in your experience, how have science and local knowledge been mobilized to ensure that conservation actors, including local communities, remain interested and supportive of long-term protection and expansion efforts?
the first one muna. So remain interested. Yeah, that's a very difficult situation. Very, very difficult question. My experience, we're limited, like 20 years. It's still quite short if you think about it. My experience is there. I mean, people have talked about this before, and I don't know what really makes them that. There are champions out there. There are people who really do this, and I'm amazed. I'm just amazed that they remain interested, given different situations. I don't have all the answers regarding that for sure. Even I am amazed how they do it, and I can name a few in my work. So maybe the answer is they really just care, and you have to find and finding ways to do that. I mean, that's the reason why, for example, we developed that tool called Fishmap, so that they, for sure, those who learn some of these skills can actually apply them and not lose interest, because now there's a way to keep the data and actually get your own conclusions from your own work. You don't have to have a scientist around to do that. So there are examples like that. But yeah, overall, I'm just amazed that given that some of those jobs are really challenging, you can imagine that some of them are subject to a lot of political uncertainties because of politics. I'm just amazed that they're continuing. The second one is,
Since it's from the same person, can I just add her second question from Nori Espana? What are your thoughts on fortress conservation? Fortress conservation.
I'm not familiar with the term. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
So the other questions were about how can we engage communities such as fisher folks and coastal communities in MPA management?
That's happening. That's already happening. Okay, so it's happening all the time. You just have to look out there. I think the challenge is how to do that better all the time. So, and there's layers there as well. I'm a scientist by profession, and I do a lot of those things, or try to do. But there are others who are actually very good at it on the ground, and they're the ones engaged. And us as scientists should be engaging with them, because that can really amplify a lot of, for example, the 10 things that I talked about here, that can be amplified by those other people. It's not just about scientists. So yeah.
I'll ask the audience first if there's some burning questions before we entertain the next question from online? Van?
Magandang hapon, Rene. Thank you for the interesting talk. Madaming tanong sa isip ko, pero isa lang yung napili kong tanong. You have presented a figure on some reserves of fishes in the long-term monitoring data after typhoon in Apo Island. How about corals? There are 3%. May I know the life history strategies, or do you have that information in terms of species?
In terms of species, wala kami alam. Kasi cover the method that I adopted since I they did. Russ is a fish person. Is cover or based. So the surveys are mostly about fish. The benthos is scored very broadly in 10 by 10. Okay, but that's supposed to change last year because last year we had a chance to collect photographic data. So I could tell you, for example, that the soft corals, I can tell apart soft and hard. But we now have an idea of what's the composition like. But in my notes, I'm pretty sure I can tell you, what kind of coral, but not species. Okay. But initially, the story would be initially the soft corals were the winners, and now they're going down. So there was competition for space. There was a lot of vegetative growth as well by Galaxia. So may natirang Galaxia, and then but the recruits for sure were Acropora.
Okay, interesting kasi for looking at climate resilient reefs, of course, as you mentioned in your PU project, diba, titingnan nyo yung life history strategies. And maybe it's a good baseline of looking at this species.
Yes, and the big question really there is what is resilient reef, diba? There are many definitions.
Bias ako sa coral, sorry.
So
Si Manet sa inverts ako sa coral. Hard and soft corals pala ako. And yeah, very interesting talk, and we'll be doing more naman, so we have project in
yeah,
we will be doing that.
yeah. Even there's a big question, but I mean, we have to package a proposal for the Pew. But the question is, what's a resilient reef? Nobody really knows until it happens. That's the idea. But to me, personally, my definition of it has something to do with resilient ecosystem services also. So
Okay, so I think we have enough time. I was told that we have until 4 o'clock to have this discussion. So students, prepare your questions. Maybe we could move on to the online question. Thank you.
So from an anonymous attendee, the firm is committed to 30 by 30. What do you think of establishing more MPAs, particularly seascapes in populated areas, unlike an isolated natural park like Tubataha, under the e-NIPAS compared to locally managed MPA networks? If e-NIPAS seascapes, do you think SPZs/NTZs should be emphasized or bigger in area?
what's SPZs and MPZs in terminology? Maybe they can clarify later. But the question is, what do I think of achieving that target, diba? Yung 30 by 30. Okay.
And they were asking about seascapes in populated areas
yeah, okay.
versus isolated.
That will always be the tricky bit, diba? 115 million archipelagic, a lot of people using the coastal areas. That will always be the tricky bit. Even in the targets of the government, it's not going to be 30% by 30 by 30. I think it's going to be around 15.9 or something like that, because 30 is not feasible. It's looking like that. Okay. But it's moving, it's coming from something like 3%, I think. If I remember, I need to review the slides. So it's still quite a bit, of a jump from that to 15 or 16%. Okay. And how will that be done? Okay. So there's a lot of discussion about this. I think the one thing that we shouldn't be doing is to just declare areas as protected and then wala talagang management. That's probably the last thing that we should do. Well, just to abide by certain targets. That's one. The second one is, I think we really need to look at this idea of locally based MPA networks. There was some discussion of whether it's going to fall into the MPA side or the OECM side, of things. But whatever the final decision would be, I think you really need to improve that part and see where are the opportunities. It might have something to do in terms of the science, something to do with ecologies that was mentioned earlier. Trying to understand the biggest effects, biggest bang for your buck. But those locally managed ones, and the emerging pattern is, the feasible scales will be at about 100 Ks, I think. And that's in the scale of several municipalities, agreeing to do the right thing. How to improve that, apart from just ticking the box saying that we've covered, X area already. I think that's where it should go. How to do that? Anyone's game. But as scientists, I think we should participate in this and really try to help out. So yeah.
Okay, any students? First student who asks question will have I don't know. I will not promise you any bonus point for my class. Any student? Marine Eco, Bio-Osh? Then you could continue the online question, please. Thank you.
Ma'am Malu Maclone, are MPAs solely for protection? How about MPAs for rehabilitation? Can disturbed reefs become MPAs? Are there success stories on the latter?
There are a lot of disturbed reefs in MPAs, for sure. Are they only for protection, and can they also be for rehabilitation? The way I would think about it is maybe, and when the rehabilitation, some of the rehab people are here, the rehabilitation efforts are better off in MPAs, maybe. Mine is like doing, so yeah, so maybe, that's a maybe. I guess that will happen if there's an intersection talaga for a need to rehabilitate within a particular MPA. So that happens, I think. But the answer is the definition that I put out in the talk is fully or partially. But partially protected MPA, there's so many other activities that can happen as long as they're not destructive and they can be regulated. So yeah. I think practically speaking, some of these, I'm not. Van is going to give a talk about rehab, I think, later on. But some of these efforts to rehabilitate, for example, coral reefs, happen in MPAs. The coral restoration part, yeah.
Is there other question? Okay.
Hi sir, great talk po. Since hindi ba familiar sa topics ng MPAs, I would like to ask first, why do MPAs become these paper MPAs? Because you have mentioned that only 3 out of 10 MPAs are fully functional. And second is, other than like putting more effort and creating more MPAs, how do we make sure that seven out of 10 not functional MPAs become more functional, or are there efforts making them become functional?
This whole idea has something to do. You might have heard of parang increasing management effectiveness ng MPAs. You probably heard of tools like the meet, to try to encourage better management, for example. So marami reasons, di ba? Nakakaligtaan na, nag-iba yung priorities, and walang support, nangyayari yun. To turn that around takes a whole effort from many sectors, not only government, but also private sector, even academia for sure. But yung Marine Protected Area Support Network, for example, tries to, be in that effort to reverse that trend. And that should, if you want to get involved in that, that's one forum. But yeah, for some of the more successful MPAs, you can say na it takes there's certain kinds of people who really push it. For example, I talked to, I don't want to mention sana, di ba? But for example, in Bataha, that's because of, the very, very energetic person, who's really doing her best, to do that. And of course, a lot of other supporters, that's probably going to be a special case again. Apo was quite successful because of the early days. There was a lot of community support. And then relatively successful pa rin siya because of national support as well. Kasama siya sa NIPAS. So maybe to learn from something from that, look at the best practices. And there would be a lot of things in the literature and also from people's experiences to tell you how we could possibly reverse that, and there are many answers to that.
Are you asking a question or just holding the microphone?
Asking.
Asking, sir. Okay.
For my bonus points, check. So thanks for the insightful talk, Dr. Rene. So question lang for curiosity. In the case of Ireland, diba, there is a high catch per unit effort during the reserve. You said, based on the studies, the fishing mostly happens on the northern side. I'm just wondering, what if people know that they will catch a lot of fish to the marine reserve, while they still go fish at the northern side. I'm assuming that it may have some social aspect to it, but it also tells me that there might be some insights in incorporating a resilience program, diba? We could maybe culture based on what happened in that the social aspect in that area, they respect it enough na hindi sila mag-fish doon. So could you provide some context on that?
I think the context is in like 6 paragraphs in that paper. It talks about it. But yeah, sure, there's a social aspect to it also, we think, no? When I read that paper, I tried to enumerate some possible reasons. It varies, no, from the idea na, kasi what they're fishing in the north are the big jacks. So imagine if you get one of those, and it's back in the day 3,000 pesos for one of those, diba? Set ka na for the month. So the idea of hitting the jackpot in the north is what draws a lot of people there, because it's a strong current that. So that's one. The other one is what you said, which is the social stigma na if you were accused of going inside the reserve, that was a factor back then. To this day, in Apo. Parang it's a small community, and if you're seen as the one parang not doing the right thing, diba? So there is that as well. And if you read that paper, and for those who are looking at that literature, the seasonality in the fishing pattern also. So when it's good to fish in the north, everyone's there. And when it's amihan na, everyone's not there. They're probably on the west or close to the reserve. Yeah. So may ganun aspect. What else is there? Yeah, so there's the social there's a social side there's a social side to that issue for sure. But it's an interesting situation because in many places the fishing the line happens a lot. As in even in Sumilon, people fish so close to the buoys that it's pretty much you can see the weights and the hooks inside the on the reef slope. Some of you who you've gone to Sumilon and you've seen it, yeah. So yeah, so it's almost it's very unlike the phenomenon of fishing the line, because in that place they seem to be going to the national reserve at least back then, very seldom. Yeah. Last point, may tourism, diba? There's also that idea, and it's written in some of those papers also, not necessarily mine, even Dr. Alcala's, na tourism was a big factor in Apo as well. So when livelihoods were supported by tourism, some people didn't have to fish as much. What's happening right now, because of the turtles, for example, you make a lot of money guiding tourists to see the turtles. So that's better money than fishing.
If there's question, okay. We'll have one question from the on-site and then one question online. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for the very insightful talk. So I'd like to come with that sa images. And yeah. So it reminds me of an analog sa terrestrial ecosystem ng forest fire wherein a natural phenomenon disrupts the whole ecosystem, but then positively the effect is it allows regeneration of the area, and sometimes it invites proliferation of other organisms, diba? So I wonder if is this also the case for coral reefs na yes, nawala completely yung existing habitat, and then therefore there is a quote-unquote chance ng revival or chance for other species, for example, to thrive in the area, yes. So, and since may monitoring then, which is a good thing, before and after these types of events, meron bang interesting na mga, for example, fish species, if you have data dun sa corals ng previously wala sila dun, pero due to this instance, this major event ay na-observe sila after this kind of major event, and then therefore dumami sila. Baka may ganun bang instances in these areas?
So the question is, meron bang cases wherein mga bago na hindi pa na-observe doon? No. I guess the way to answer that for me siguro right now is to think about this time scale. This is only the last 20 years, and it extends to 83, diba? Another 20 years. Okay, so if you look at the changes, definitely a lot of things happen more than just what happens acute disturbance, no, like the storms. For example, one possible one thing that I was thinking about when you were speaking is ano ba yung sinasabi ng data dito sa this side, no? The area west of the island. What was that before? Before it slowly went up to 75%. And the data is showing na actually mas maraming soft coral than dati. Okay? Even in the first time I went to Apo Island, what I remember on that western side, there's actually more soft corals than hard corals there, even closer to the slope. Of course, then sila sa shallows, pero even closer to the slope, puro marami soft corals doon. So nag-shift yan, pero over a long period of time through competition ng dalawa. What was quite surprising, well, maybe because I'm having watched the literature, I need to look at it in the literature. Maybe early stages pa lang to. I was thinking initially, maybe naively, that these soft corals will stick around because of what I knew about this. But apparently, they're outcompeted now by the fast-growing branching coral. Okay, so, but you're right. May pwede mangyari yun. Kasi open space yun, di ba? For anything that can colonize it. Whether it will shift or not, I don't know. What it's telling us within that even that long time scale, which is probably short for these benthic organisms, pwedeng may clean change or shift, pwedeng mahabang shift, di ba? That's for the benthic organisms. For fish, there will be shorter changes in the community structure driven by the habitat. No? Definitely, iba yung community structure niyan nung natanggal yung habitat kasi iba yung na-dominate, for example, yung mga invertebrates and scarabs, no? Whether I haven't checked the data, but it would be nice to check, kung ano yung community structure in 2023 versus, for example, here, di ba? Nung medyo mataas na yung corals, or even further down, di ba? Ano itsura? We haven't done that. But definitely shifts in the community structure can happen, and it's most likely driven by losses, and losses in some and gains in others, and that's probably something close to what you're thinking. Last point is, in the long-term data in Sululan and Apo, there are some clear cases of recruitment pulses ng fish, meaning there's a big cohort of whatever, or what could be recruitment failure over the time scale, meaning hindi siya nag-recruit. Pero okay na yung habitat. Okay? So that can happen, and that's stochasticity of larval supply that I was talking about. So if you're talking about larval subsidies, that's driven by a lot of what's happening in the plankton. Yeah.
Okay. Marine eco class, there you go. So freeing up of space, as long as you have recruits, they could potentially colonize. So it will come out in your exam. So question, please.
So from Dev Albao, have you witnessed more buy-in from stakeholders for marine protected areas over the years? Any trends to watch out for, especially revolving the interpretation of your scientific findings around MPAs and MPA networks?
Ito naman ang tanong ni Dev. More buy-in? Have I witnessed more buy-in? And then?
Any trends to watch out for?
Any trends to watch out for? I know. Yeah, that's making me think. Any increase in buy-in? Siguro, I hope, it's more like I hope, in some places, definitely nangyayari yan, where there is a lot of attention and support by not only external actors, but also the internal ones. For example, local government. So, importante yun eh. It cannot just be external. Okay, I consider myself as an external factor. Trends. I think the reason why I thought about this project in Pew was because, okay, I think that, yeah, we talk about it even in this room or even in this institute, and we read it in the literature. But my question there is, what's really going on at the ground level? Diba? So I think the trend is there's less appreciation for that right now. For example, climate change is for many people, I think it's very difficult to appreciate that. Even with the managers that I work with in Negros Oriental, and we are going to be partners in the Pew. I have very lot conversations with them about what's happening with coral bleaching and all that. So hopefully the trend is there's going to be more of that awareness on the ground, and hopefully that translates to trying to secure ecosystem services. How, diba? That's a big question na eh. And maybe that's what I would watch out for. Parang more like trying to help nudge it to the right direction rather than a trend that might be everyone's lost interest or it's too difficult, diba? Or too hopeless. Kasi it can come like that eh. So I think, stopping that, parang kung slippery slope yan, diba? Stopping it from sliding is probably what I would like to do. Yeah.
From anonymous attendees, what would it take to diminish the negative reputation from immediate communities often associated with MPAs?
Yes, that's very, very important. So definitely, and that's really understandable, no? Now, syempre may resistance yan. Because that's less fishing grounds, for example, or you're taking away the best fishing grounds. And I didn't point it out in this talk, but the idea of adult spillover, no, it's probably the one that helped a lot in spreading that MPA idea. Okay, I don't want to diminish that. I just wanted to point out that we cannot just think of that lang, diba? So there's a lot of um, stuff written about that. Like the what's the term? Psychological effect almost. I think in some literature, sinasabi na the idea of these MPAs providing immediate, benefits in terms of fish. But that's important. But at the same time, it's important to balance that as well, because the investment is actually a longer term investment. Okay, which means that we have to look for ways to also address the longer term losses, opportunity losses, for example, opportunity costs. So yeah, it's a real matter, and hindi lang yung even ako, I'm an ecologist, diba? And I advocate for this, but it's not only the realm of marine scientists. It's a social issue. Yeah.
This is actually, the next question is, I think, just the other side of the coin. How can we encourage community partners and managers to declare and establish larger MPAs within municipal waters?
Okay. This is what I learned in the Palawan experience, the Colombianos experience. And it deserves a bit of another discussion. When we first came in, and there were a lot of projects before that, talking about MPA networks, no? The initial response was, we already know what's going on and we have enough MPAs. Even some of our partners were saying that, that's going to be fine, But what was interesting was when we actually mapped it and quantified it and used satellite images and data ganyan, to actually estimate what percent of the different habitats are protected. The answer was dismal, diba? 3%, 5%, 7%, below 15% or 30% if you're in Palawan. Okay. And the effect was this. Instead of them, parang saying na, okay na yan, di ba? Parang competitive ngayon yung mga local governments. Sila yung stakeholders. They say na, actually, we can probably do better. Okay? So, and then that's where the design process enters. How do you help make those decisions based on the planning framework? Okay? So I think there's a chance to do that using these approaches. And it's a simple matter, but it's so instructive because the resistance is coming from not having enough information. Okay, yun ang isa. So our job as scientists is to provide the right information for decisions to be made on the basis of that information. But there's a down the line, syempre, iba yung nag-decide na certain group of people who are in a position to do so, say na, okay, dito na okay, based on that approach. There's actually a lot of other things that will happen down the line for that to actually work. And the process is iterative. Okay? So, hindi yan dahil sinabi ni Dr. So-and-so, yun na yun eh. Hindi naman ganun yun eh. Okay? So, it really has to be a local process. And that's where you have that layer of people who are doing this. And yeah, so that's my experience in Palawan. So,
Jen? Okay, we're going towards the end of our discussion. So one more question from Jem. Is there more online? Maybe one more from online and then I'll start closing. Okay, thank you.
Roger. So, one thing to point out sa restoring ng MPAs, I think it will benefit na mention Erlo's notorious paper. But you mentioned MPAs in the Philippines. And Erlo's paper highlighted that there's a mismatch between the increasing numbers of MPA and a seemingly negative change in policies and management. So I'm assuming that majority of those ones or not majority, maybe many of those are paper and base. So my question is, are there negative effects of like increasing numbers of MPs?
in terms of policy, in terms of
I want some of the papers of yung kay Ras tsaka kay Alcala saying that there's better to have an MPA than nothing. So there's some MPAs, does it have a negative effect? Kasi not all of those have a positive effect din, ba?
I think okay. Medyo mixed signals, pero there's a policy side which is para improvement of policy that you raised. But if it's a question about negative effects, okay, definitely there will be pain before the gain, diba? In some papers they call it that the pain before the gain. Okay, if you're gonna push for, let's say, 15% or 30%, that means you've lost 85, 30, or 70% of your fishing grounds. Okay. But where are we now with MPAs, for example? If you look at the numbers, it's 3.5% of coral reefs. So then, 95% is actually out there for the taking, and if you want to think of it that way. So the negative effects, versus what you could probably gain from just increasing, you have to look at it from that. Of course, there will be localized losses, pero that's where the planning should be able to help. So maybe yun, di ba? For example, 0.5% in municipal waters, 99.5 is actually open. Di ba? So you have to look at it from that perspective siguro. Okay, 30% will pain yun for sure, di ba? Pero I think with some smarter planning, you could probably protect where it should matter, and then hopefully that's gonna punch above its weight. So I think the way I would look at it would be something like that. Parang where is it right now in terms of percentage, and meaning what is still. Kasi diba, if we also bring in other forms of management, o sige, that's gonna be one. Pero in the, well, 95%, you're running for 5%, okay, 95%. Okay, sige, 5% lang okay. Pero what are you gonna do with the 95%? You should probably also do other conventional fisheries management. Diba? So, it's not gonna be MPAs lang eh.
Yeah, before we ask the last question, maybe we should not think that this will be the end of the discussion. So you could always go and see Rene if you have questions, because we are almost out of time. We'll have one question from online.
In the conduct of baseline studies from an anonymous attendee, I presume the method of collection should be repeatable and the studies should include indicator criteria for monitoring progress, tracking changes, and evaluating the effectiveness of the MPA. What are the important considerations for data collection?
I think sabi nga, di ba? In general, what are the important ones?
In baseline studies, yung tanong niya. But I think, yeah, like, what are the, I guess, how do you do it? Like monitoring progress?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's I'm not exactly sure what is being asked, but if it's what kind of effect, for example. But if it's talking about something like ecological monitoring, diba? As long as you have a consistent method throughout, and the observers are, if not the same, at least parehas ng training, diba? And then you try to standardize that, then that's it. But if it's talking about something else, kasi medyo vague, which part? But parang masagot mo rin eh, sa tanong eh, di ba? But yeah, siguro just to point out, if it's specific to the methods of doing the longer term surveys in Apo and Sumilon, that method has been done so consistently since 83, pretty much, that when I do the surveys, I pretty much dive like Gary Russ. So how it's done, and which groups are counted first, and how the benthos is estimated, for example. In fact, I had to piggyback for about 6 years to actually learn that, because it's different from how we normally do it, which is 50-meter transects with 10-meter wide, But as a general principle, that consistency is important, which I think is incorporated in the question. Yeah.
Okay, so end the discussion formally, but like I said, you could always go to Rene and discuss if you have some other questions, but maybe just a teaser at pabaon sa mga estudyante natin. Rene, you ended up your talk with going back to the 10 to-do list. I don't know if you have some reason that you rank it or your ranking has some weight, and the rank number 1 is no fishing, right? Protection, is it like protection from fishing? So this is just some hypothetical question. So I assume, just a yes or no question, I assume that your MPA is primarily to protect that fish, right? With that 1K. Okay, you don't have to answer that question if it's tricky enough. So, but maybe looking at, because protecting habitat is only second. So my question is, to protect the fish, dapat may kakainin siya. So that goes to trophic dynamics, no? And then, do you have a data to say that your coral reef actually provide so much food for the fish compared to other primary producers? I'm just thinking it maybe outside the box, or just trying to tease you. Pero the question is more of, if you have an alternate state of habitat, providing structure, okay pa rin ba yung fish mo kung ang primary na proprotektahan natin is fish?
Yeah, I see where you're driving at, which is parang, but as a premise, hindi lang fishing pinoprotektahan, obviously, di ba? But the question has something to do with how these ecosystems function, di ba? Even for reefs, I think hindi naman yun just on the, I mean, importante yung habitat for sure, but diba, a lot of the production is due to a lot of things imported, for example, from plankton, diba? The other question, the question seems to have that dimension ng altered states, diba? And that even that is discussed in the literature, diba? Parang what's yung papers that talk about what kind of fish productivity would you have if you have declining coral health, diba? And what's really sustaining that. So it's something that we need to really consider, I think, in the years and decades to come, because there will be a point where I don't think we can do much about coral losses. So what's kaya sabi ko din sa last is what sort of productivity is going to be maintained, diba, when you have this march driven by climate change. So, and that's the open question. There, of course, there's literature on that, but what does it mean in that in the context that we have in this particular country? So, yun, it's a broader definition of what is resilient, diba? So yeah.
Okay, so that means there's still a lot of open question, things to do, research. So yeah, go ahead and spread your wings, spread your knowledge, or get more knowledge. Thank you very much, Rene. So there's some food for those who stayed until the last second. Otherwise, joke.